How about you? Are you having a good fall?
Personally, yeah, I was just telling Kix, celebrations, we're doing well on our doe harvest. My son-in-law, Zach, got two Zachs now, sons-in-laws. Um, uh, killed a nice 10-pointer last weekend. Be 2 weekends this coming by himself. Same stand he killed his big buck out of last year. Perfect shot, very, very controlled and measured, did a wonderful job. And had the family out last weekend. Maybe I'm stealing away content that we should be talking about on the podcast. Maybe we can repeat it, I guess.
I'm recording you already, Tom.
Oh, okay, good.
I-
So last weekend was our gun opener, and had both of my daughters and their husbands, both Zachs out, and my wife was babysitting Bo in the camp, and the boys, the Zachs, sat together and saw one of our top two shooters at 70 yards tending and following a hot doe around. And of course, Zach York was already tagged out. Indiana's a 1-buck state, so Zach Veeder was the shooter, and he opted to carry his bow that morning, which I commend him for doing that. But he could have taken this probably a 155 10-pointer.
Wow.
But hey, man, it was fun. They had an exciting experience and interaction with that deer, and he's ready to come back out and try it again. So that's all.
Wow. It's awesome. They got to see him and have that interaction, and yeah,
exactly.
I feel for him now, having a deer a little bit out of range like that. So wow, maybe this weekend.
It's all fun. Yeah, it keeps him juiced up and ready to come back and try it again. So that's all I can ask for. Of course, I love every minute of it, having him out there at camp. And I was sitting with my daughter Lauren in a redneck blind, and we saw a lot of little scrub bucks and some does. But she's a seasoned hunter, even though she's not even quite 30 years old yet. She's killed it well. That deer over my shoulder was a 160-inch deer right there that she shot when she was 12 years old.
Wow.
So she's a little selective, which I appreciate, and she understands the whole management aspect and letting deer get some age on them. She texted me yesterday. She said, "Dad, I'm trying to work out the next 2 weekends of my schedule. So I'm working hard to make time." So
that's awesome.
Absolutely. It is.
Congratulations, man. You've done that right.
Well, you as well. Thank you.
Oh, well,
thank you.
That's awesome. Guys, today we have Mr. Kip Adams with us. Kip is the Chief Conservation Officer for the National Deer Association. He's been there since 2002. Before that, he was a wildlife biologist for the Florida Game and Fish Commission and Deer and Bear Project leader for the New Hampshire Game and Fish Department. He earned his bachelor's degree in wildlife and fisheries from wildlife and fisheries science from Penn State University, and he earned his master's degree from University of New Hampshire. He is a certified wildlife biologist and a licensed taxidermist. We're here to talk to Kip today. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, Kix. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's the Kix and Kip show, apparently. Huh?
We might get those crossed up a little bit today.
Yeah. Well, Kip, tell us a little bit about yourself, man. I'm curious how you got involved with the National Deer Association. You've been with them for what, 22, 23 years, something like that now?
Yeah, it's been a long time. I don't feel anywhere near old enough to have been with an organization for that long, but it's been a great ride, Kix. So I grew up in northern Pennsylvania. I grew up in, a family that hunted. My dad hunted, my grandparents hunted, my uncles hunted, my friends, like just a place that everybody hunted. It seemed like the most natural thing in the world. And I grew up on a dairy farm, so I always had a connection to the outdoors and to nature. And I love the hunting end. And so we had some family land that we farmed on. And my dad always made it a point, even from an early age, to let me know, hey, we're really lucky that we get to hunt here, but it's our responsibility to take care of this. So that instilled a desire to be a wildlife biologist at a very young age. And so I was lucky. I wasn't one of those people that went to college trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Man, I knew from early on, this is my path. I want to be a wildlife biologist. At that time, really the only jobs were state or federal agency jobs. So my career path was going to be a state wildlife biologist and eventually a state's deer biologist. I had great times in Florida working for that state wildlife agency and New Hampshire's wildlife agency. And it was when I was in New Hampshire that I learned about, the precursor to the National Deer Association, which was a QDMA. And I became a member immediately. At this point, I had spent about a decade outside of Pennsylvania. I knew that at some point I wanted to get back to PA. In 2002, QDMA advertised their first position in the Northeast, which was Northeast Regional Director, and it had to be person had to live in Pennsylvania. And I thought, man, that has my name written all over it. So I applied for that. I got that. And I've been with the organization since '02. And man, it has been a great ride. So I'm very fortunate the places it's taken me and the people it's allowed me to meet and, the deer herds that I've been able to impact. So I enjoy it. I'm very lucky.
That's awesome. So you said you started with the NDA in 2002, what used to be QDMA, I guess. And so before that, you was with New Hampshire and Florida. What year did you start doing that with them?
Yes, I got out of grad school in 1995. And so the first job I had was with the state of Florida. I was in Central Florida, managing a wildlife management area there. I spent 4 years there and had a great time. And you know what? Being from the North, I didn't want to go to the South. Like literally at that point, the furthest south I had ever been in my life was Washington, D.C. And that was on our 6th grade class trip. So, and as you know, Washington, D.C. is not very far south. So to go there for work, knowing nothing about the South, I thought, man, I just want to stay in the North. Well, it turned out that was the best thing that could have happened to an aspiring deer biologist is to get out of the area you grew up, get to a whole nother region. And while, deer eat a lot of the same things in Florida as they do in the North, what really helped from a deer biologist perspective was, the hunting culture. I had no concept that hunters hunted any different outside of Pennsylvania. I thought New York and Ohio and Georgia and Florida and everywhere else, it was all the same. And, that is not true at all. And that more than anything else is what makes or breaks deer management programs. So going to Florida did me a world of good. And I was there from 1995 to 99. At that point, New Hampshire Fish and Game's deer biologist was promoted to their chief of wildlife, which opened up that deer biologist position. And I did my graduate work in New Hampshire. I worked very closely with New Hampshire Fish and Game at that point. So I knew a lot of the players there. I understood the system. So in 99, I thought this is my ticket to get back north. So I applied for that job in New Hampshire Fish and Game, got that. And actually, they gave me the bear position as well. So that was a tremendous amount of fun, getting to oversee the deer and the bear program. So New Hampshire had a lot of money for bear research. So we did some really cool things with bear and, climbing in bear dens and putting GPS radio collars on bears. And this is, back in 2000. And, at that point, GPS collars were brand new. So that was pretty novel work. But New Hampshire has a great deer management program. They, did even way back then, they were one of the only states that had really good age structure on both bucks and does. A lot of places had it on does, but not bucks because we shot so many bucks early. Well, New Hampshire had really good age structure. They had mature bucks. You got to see mature deer interacting with others. So that was a cool thing as well. So both of those jobs were great. I learned a tremendous amount and they prepared me well for my position with NDA. And I still get to work with a lot of state wildlife agencies now. So I like that a lot. I really enjoy that.
So you've been doing this for about 30 years. You've obviously know a ton about wildlife and deer and all the different wildlife. 20, let's say 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when you started doing all this, it seems like there wasn't the class or mature age of bucks that we see now. At least from my perspective, I feel like nowadays there's a lot bigger bucks, there's a lot older bucks, and people are managing their properties a lot better. Do you kind of feel the same way, or?
Absolutely. And you are 100% correct. And we have the data to show that. Every year we produce an annual deer report where we collect data from every state wildlife agency on the numbers of bucks they shoot, does they shoot, the age structure of those. So we have been monitoring the age structure of the buck harvest from 1989 to now. And so 20 years ago, there were way more yearling bucks shot and, very few mature deer or mature bucks in the harvest. That's very different today. Today, only about a quarter of all the bucks shot in the U.S. are 1.5 years old. And conversely, over 40% of them are 3.5 or older. So it's been an entire change, in the age structure of bucks, due in large part to educational programs, change in hunting culture, hunters understanding the value of passing young bucks, restrictions by many state wildlife agencies to protect young bucks. So we have today better age structure on the buck side of the population, than we have in at least the last 100 years. So, and that's an awesome thing. So, man, this is a great time to be deer hunting. There's more older bucks out there to photograph on trail cameras, to watch in, ag fields during the summer, and then get to chase all fall. So my kids grow up, in a very different way than I did relative to what they get to chase. Of course, Tom kids did as well. And man, today is a great, great time to be chasing whitetails.
If you don't mind me jumping in here, Kix.
Jump in anytime you want, Tom.
I've known Kip, probably from that 2002, 2003 time frame when, I was out of college and was running a landscape contracting business, but I was super interested in the wildlife and the outdoors. I minored in wildlife management. I started here at Purdue to be a wildlife biologist, but the job forecast my sophomore year was pretty bleak and pathetic for me. So my parents said, hey, we're helping you pay college. Is that something you want to continue to pursue? So I switched over into landscape architecture, but I continued a minor in wildlife and that was always where my passion was. So when I became involved in the outdoor industry with the product, I went to the trade shows and automatically knew that the Quality Deer Management Association was a core organization at the heart of what I was interested and passionate about. So I got to meet Kip there early on at the national convention. By the way, we probably need to do a little history backwards, Kip, with Joe Hamilton and how this thing came into existence in the first place. But at that same time, I felt so passionate about the organization and the message and the informative instructional part of it being an educational organization and a not-for-profit that I joined a local branch here. And not tooting my own horn, but since that 2002 or 3, I have been involved in a leadership role in our local chapter here ever since, because it's something that to this day I'm super passionate and I believe wholeheartedly in the message. He's being a little shy or humble about what the messaging from the Quality Deer Management Association has done through these last couple of decades. That entity alone, I believe, was the driving force for this shift that you've seen, Kix. And I know this is a little bit, probably we're a little older than you maybe, but back in the early 2000s, we were coming from a shift that our dads and grandpa, by the way, mine didn't hunt. So I was a new guy in a new position, had to self-taught a lot of things. But back then it was, you never shot a doe. A doe was a protected, holy grail of deer hunting, because that was going to be your next year's offspring. And then the does attracted the bucks. There was a whole cultural attitude towards doe harvest. So I think early on in the organization's first decade was the cultural shift of the mindset of people 100% protecting does and passing on younger bucks. If you want meat for the freezer, shoot a doe versus that 1.5-year-old buck, saying you got your buck, those kinds of things. But what had happened was that there was such a protectionary attitude towards does that deer numbers were climbing through the mid 90s and so forth, to the point in many areas where they were, you could say, overpopulated. So I got to witness this shift of attitude, for 20 years plus now, of that entity being at the helm of this educational shift. And it's been such a interesting and fun thing to experience. Had a little bit to do with being on a committee here in Indiana when the 1 buck rule was being tossed around with our local conservation department here in Indiana. You could kill 2 bucks in Indiana, and there was a proposal that we would shift from 2 bucks to 1 legal deer. And that met with a huge amount of resistance from the cultural mindset here. By golly, you can't take away my rights to be able to shoot whatever bucks I want to. And luckily it passed with a 5-year trial period. I wish, Kip, I could recall the date back then. We went down there and spoke on the behalf of the Quality Deer Management Association. And I know you, I believe on our behalf, sent a letter to the Natural Resources Committee here with the recommendations. And again, part of that education too was not about, we are not trophy hunters, we are managers. Large mature deer are an awesome byproduct of good quality sound management practices on a property. So Kix, the Indiana at large deer hunting, fellowship, begrudgingly agreed to do this 5-year trial of a 1 buck rule. I avoided some of the social back and forth, the bannering, because there was a lot of upset people at that time. But I can tell you, by year 2, by year 3, and by year 5, people were saying there is no way in the world you're going to take this 1 buck rule and go back the other direction, because people were, for the first time, seeing a larger majority of mature bucks in the age classes of where they were hunting. And the interesting way to look at it too, it's not that guys were shooting 2 bucks. A lot of guys weren't shooting 2 bucks, but the first deer they were shooting was a little deer, a young deer, and then they were trophy hunting for their second buck. So what that did is allowed so many of those younger age class bucks to make it into that 2 and 3 year level. And guys saw that result and were excited about what they were seeing in their property. And the rest is history. It's been no looking back ever since. You combine that with all the habitat sound management, habitat development information that's out there that has been, it's commonplace now, but back then it wasn't. Food plots were it, and that was the breaking ground. And nobody talked about timber stand improvement or native grasses or pollinators or different other parts of native habitat management. But it's a full spectrum approach now. I'm sorry I've stolen 5 minutes of the conversation here, but that's just what I've seen here in Indiana, and it's been an exciting thing to witness.
Yeah. So let me first start off. I appreciate your compliment about my age, but I'm older than I look, Tom. I remember.
Well, you hide it well.
I remember back, Missouri used to be a 3-buck state. So we could kill 2 bucks with our archery tag, and then we had 1 for the rifle season. And it was probably, I don't know, better than 10 years ago now when they changed that. They went to just a 2-buck state now, 1 with your bow and 1 with your rifle. And that was a big deal in Missouri back then when they changed that. And then it was probably, I don't know, where the state of Missouri added a 4-point rule. And you couldn't, in some counties, mostly in the northern counties, and I really wish they would do it all over the state. They just haven't yet. But you had to have at least 4 on one side before you could take it. And that made a huge difference in the quality of deer we were seeing in northern Missouri. Now, we don't have that rule in southern Missouri where I'm at, but man, I wish they would sure do something. It makes a big difference. It really does. And I know a lot of hunters feel the same way. I don't know why they haven't yet. Do you guys have any rules like that up there?
Yeah, there's a lot of states that have antler restrictions. 21 or 22 states now have some form of antler restrictions to protect the majority of yearling bucks. I think 7 of those states, those restrictions are statewide for at least one of the bucks in the bag limit. The rest of those use them in part of the state, like you're talking about in Missouri. And, at one point, those were really necessary to protect yearling bucks. Like as Tom was saying, 20 years ago for sure. Today, man, some of the states that have the best age structure for bucks don't have any antler restrictions. It's just been such a cultural shift for hunters today. Even if you can shoot, a yearling buck, many just don't, just because they know the value of, if they let them get a little older, or, they want the opportunity to chase one, that's 2 or 3 or 4, or 5 years old. So we're in a good place today because since we do have such good age structure, it's totally fine to shoot some yearling bucks, which is great for, new hunters, whether they're youth hunters or adults. You don't have to be restricted, but at the same time, you can shoot a bunch of those, but still, because we have so many older bucks out there, we maintain good age structure. So we're at a good place relative to what agencies, are able to allow, from within the hunting season. And man, there was a time where I talked antler restrictions seemingly every day with state wildlife agencies and with hunters. Hunters wanted them, and some agencies wanted them, some didn't. So that was always the topic of conversation. And literally today, I almost never hear that. There's a couple states, Michigan and New York being the 2, where we still hear that from some hunters there, like, man, we wish we had these. But outside of that, it is a non-topic anymore because there is such good age structure across almost all of the whitetails range.
Missouri got rid of some of their antler point restrictions in a lot of their counties because of this CWD thing that's going on right now. And we're having a pretty massive problem with that. So I think at this point, they're just wanting them kind of cold out. And so they got rid of that in a lot of the counties up north. Whether it made a difference, I think this is the first year they've done that. So we'll see.
There's some states that have done that. If they get the disease, that they don't want to protect those younger bucks. There's really 2 schools of thought on that. And one is that, take my home state of Pennsylvania, for example. Pennsylvania has antler restrictions and has maintained them. We're a 1-buck state, always have been. So, the antler restrictions apply to everybody except youth hunters. They have continued to have antler restrictions, even with CWD growing in the state because we know that most hunters won't shoot a single deer, not just in Pennsylvania, but nationwide. You take a look at all the tags that hunters have in their pockets when we go afield. Nationally, only about 41% of hunters shoot a deer each year. So less than half of all the hunters shoot one deer. Only about 18% of hunters shoot more than one deer. So what that means is, people would much rather shoot a buck than a doe.
Yeah.
So less than half the hunters are going to get anything. The ones that do, they basically just get one. A lot of those are bucks. So now we're not shooting antlerless deer, which allows deer herds to grow too high, which allows disease to really spread. So some states like Missouri have said bucks are more likely to have the disease than does. So we want to remove the antler restrictions and focus more effort on those bucks. And I understand that. Other states like Pennsylvania say, we understand bucks are more likely to have it. However, we know that most hunters aren't going to shoot a deer. And of those that do, they're not going to shoot more than one. We don't want to remove our antler restrictions and encourage people to shoot a yearling buck, because then they're not going to shoot a doe, which hurts, or they're not going to shoot an older buck. And yes, bucks are more likely to have CWD than does. Older bucks are the most likely to have it. So what Pennsylvania is saying is we're going to leave the restriction on, focus harvest effort on antlerless deer and older bucks so that we remove the deer more likely to have the disease. So not saying Pennsylvania's right and Missouri's wrong or vice versa, but those are two very different strategies that those state wildlife agencies are taking to attack the disease. Personally, I'm glad Pennsylvania's taken the one that they are, given it's where I live and do most of my hunting, because Pennsylvania does as good or a better job of any state in harvesting antlerless deer relative to the numbers of antlerless deer they harvest and the numbers of antlerless deer relative to the numbers of bucks. That's one of the reasons we have such good age structure in Pennsylvania, is because we shoot the heck out of does. So there's a lot of states struggling with CWD right now that are way under harvesting antlerless deer. So I think some of Pennsylvania's strategies that they have are really helping Pennsylvania hunters keep more effort on the antlerless side, which helps keep our deer herds healthy.
Kip, would you agree that this conversation, I know we're kind of jumping off into the CWD topic here pretty quickly. I obviously wanted to ask you some questions about it, but don't you believe it's the future of the challenges for all states?
I do. I think CWD is the single biggest challenge that we're facing. And I think CWD is the single largest threat to the future of deer herds and our hunting. So at NDA, we spend a tremendous amount of time and effort educating hunters or providing information to hunters about the disease, showing them ways they can get engaged to help limit the spread of it. We work very closely with state wildlife agencies on this. So you're exactly right, Tom. This is the single largest issue that's impacting our future.
And if I may follow up with that, I believe there's still a lot of misunderstanding, misconception, and even maybe some skepticism out there among the mass of hunters that hear about these really extreme regulations and rules related to CWD management. And a lot of guys, matter of fact, I was on the phone with a good friend of mine yesterday, and he said, I can see the results of EHD. I can go out in my farm in late summer and see dead deer laying by the creeks and the ponds, and I see those results. But I've yet to ever see a deer in my area that has succumbed or has been diagnosed as has died from EHD. Can you explain? And we could spend a whole podcast on this subject entirely by itself. So I know we have some limited time here, but for the guy that just hears bits and pieces of that term and doesn't quite, can you explain in the best short synopsis that you can the difference between a virus and the prion that creates the issue with, and the scary aspect about its longevity, those kinds of things?
Yep. And that's a great, question that your buddy asked you, because, it's very real. Like, geez, I don't see deer dying to CWD. The reality of it is, and why it should be important to hunters, is one, hemorrhagic disease has an incubation period of 5 to 7 days. And not all deer that get hemorrhagic are going to die. Some will live. Of those that die, they die very quickly. Boom. And that's why we see them dead, at water sources. Now, deer that have that disease aren't giving it to other deer. So, that's a big difference. It's not contagious among deer. So it's not contagious. They don't all die. The ones that do die very quickly. So we see them. Flipped over, CWD is contagious. So a deer that has it can give that to other deer. CWD is fatal to all whitetails. Every one of them that get it is going to die. The big difference is the incubation period, rather than being, 5 to 7 or 5 to 9 days, the incubation period is 18 to 24 months. So we don't tend to see those deer waste away very often. However, during that time, they are shedding the infectious materials to infect other deer, which is bad. And the disease is eating holes in those deer's brain, which means they're not as good at getting away from hunters, predators, cars, etc. So there's a lot of deer that die that have the disease that just aren't showing the symptoms yet. And they don't show the symptoms to the very end. So to say, I've never seen a deer die from it, you don't know that's true at all. That deer may not show symptoms to us, but it may have been impaired enough in its brain that makes it very easy for that coyote to get it, or for it to walk out in front of a car, or walk right up to a hunter. So those are the big differences. And what I tell people is, if we do an analogy to your house or your front yard, hemorrhagic disease is that hornet's nest in the bush right by your front door. When you open your door, you see that, that's a big deal. And if I kick that nest, I'm going to know immediately. That's hemorrhagic disease. CWD are the termites under your house. You don't see them. Today there's one, tomorrow there's two, next year there's 100. They are just eating the foundation of your house away. You're not seeing any of that. You have no idea that's happening until it's too late. And when it's too late, now your house collapses or it is completely wrecked. That's what CWD does to deer herds. We don't recognize an extra deer here or there that died of that. But as the prevalence rate in our herds increases, we are setting ourselves up for disaster, because it's 100% fatal to all whitetails. There is no vaccine and there is no cure. Every single one of them are going to die. So those are the big differences between the two diseases.
That's a great explanation. Can you talk a little bit about, I almost attribute the similarities of the prion, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is to almost like an alien creature because of it's such weird longevity, almost impossible to kill it, how long it stays in the soil, things like that. So it's kind of like if you don't want your family to get cancer, you do these preventative measures, because once it's there, and not saying cancer is contagious by any means, but it's like you do everything you can to prevent that disease, because once it's there, you're in bad shape.
That's right. Yeah. And those prions that you're talking about, they're in mammals. Like we have them in us, all deer have them. It's when they, become deformed that they cause a problem. And I'm certainly not a wildlife health specialist by any means, but I'm lucky enough to get to work with a bunch of them, and get to ask them these type of questions. So, it's different from a bacteria. So, we don't have a vaccine that, if we get a bacterial infection, we can take an antibiotic. It's not a bacteria, so we can't do that. It's not a virus like hemorrhagic disease. So a prion is different in both of those. So there's, we don't have anything that kills them when they're in the soil. So if a deer deposits them in the soil, we know deer share the disease through urine, saliva, blood, feces, semen. If it's in the soil, other deer that come in contact with that soil can contract the disease. So that's one of the ways that it's spread. We know now that plants that are grown in the soil where those infectious materials are uptake those materials and have them in their leaves for deer to then come and eat the leaves. So there's just crazy, ways that this thing can spread. It takes almost 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit heat, to kill it. So, it's not like we can just, cook the meat extra well and have it done. So it's very difficult to get rid of. It's a special type of incinerator to get rid of it. So, there's a lot we don't know about it. We are learning more every day, which is encouraging, for hunters and for deer managers. But right now, the best thing that we can do as hunters is limit the spread and allow science time to catch up and figure out a way to beat it.
So I'm not a wildlife biologist and I'm not smart about this kind of stuff as you guys. I'm just a real estate agent, right? So pardon me if these are dumb questions, but is this going to be a problem that, is a forever thing? because if we can't get rid of it, or we get something we're going to have to deal with for the rest of our lives as hunters.
As of right now, with the current knowledge, it's a forever thing. And fortunately, though, Kix, most places that have, or most states that have the disease, the majority of the states are free of it. So there are some states that have it throughout, like Kansas, Wyoming, Nebraska has. So there are some places that, it's throughout most of the counties. However, most of the states, it's only in a single county or a few counties or parts of a county. So even though with what we know now, yeah, it is a forever disease, that's not the case for most deer hunters or most landowners today. So hence all the more importance to limit the spread of it. And we do that by following our state wildlife agency guidelines to not move the high risk parts from where we shoot them. The high risk parts are the eyes, the brain, the spleen, the backbone. That's why you can't travel outside of disease zones with those. Because if, say I come to Missouri where the disease is, shoot a deer, bring the high risk parts back to Pennsylvania, or I go to Tom's in Indiana or whatever, and I discard that carcass on the landscape, I could have just effectively moved the disease to that new area. So that's why we don't want to move them. Now, as far as, like, hey, what do we have to deal with? From a land ownership standpoint, our CEO bought land in a CWD zone a couple years ago. So, I would buy land in a CWD zone. Is it as valuable as land outside of it? Boy, there's places in Wisconsin in the endemic zone that are some of the best, or used to be the best places in the country to shoot deer, that now the vast majority of bucks, well over 70 or over 50% of the bucks in those counties have. I'm not going there to buy land, I'll tell you that. But for most places that do have it, while it's still at very low prevalence rates, you're going to see people continue to buy that land because we want to recreate on it. You can deer hunt and do a lot of other things too, but right now it is a forever disease. Hence all the more importance to, let's limit the spread, and not make it everywhere like, or south central Wisconsin, where they first found the disease. It's situation's pretty bleak in some of those counties.
Well, the county I hunt in got put in the CWD zone this year, and we're right in the middle of our rifle season right now. I think this is the 5th day of our rifle season, started Saturday. And I will tell you, I've hunted this same exact spot for 30 years since I was 14 years old. And this is by far the worst deer season I've ever seen there. And I don't know, that, like I said, they just put it in the management zone. And first weekend we had, if we kill the deer, we had to go and get it tested. It's mandatory testing weekend. And so, but I hunted for 3 days, sat all day, every day, and didn't see a single deer. Not one. It was bad. We had 9 people in camp and only 2 bucks were killed. That was it. No does, just 2 bucks. Yeah, it's been really rough around here, but it's also 68 degrees outside, and there's some other factors that play in there, I think, too. But
I get that, and that is no fun at all. What you just said, man, I love to hunt, but I'm the same way. I start getting itchy when I'm not seeing deer as well. I have a bunch of friends in Missouri, and I've heard a little bit about the start of the season. Actually, one of my colleagues shot a pretty nice buck there the night before last. But I know the warm weathers. I agree with you. I think that's impacted, and I know at least several parts of Missouri are just loaded with acorns, which really has the deer, lots of food without having to move a bunch. I don't know if that's the case where you are or not.
Yeah.
That can certainly impact some of those movements as well.
Definitely is. We're in acorn country down here. I'm in this kind of the southwest corner down around Springfield, Missouri. And yeah, that's definitely huge acorn harvest this year.
Not a bad thing, but limits your your sightings dramatically, but you're fattening up your healthy deer right there, though.
The one thing I really enjoy about killing a deer down here in the county I hunt, and it seems like I haven't seen this anywhere else, but we don't have a lot of crop ground or a lot of, food plots down here in this area. And so it's all wooded acres, and that's all they eat is acorns. And but they have some really dark chocolate horns and, antlers, whatever. And just really pretty because you just don't see that in other places, I feel like.
I've spent a bunch of time there over the years of work and both there and then across the line into Arkansas. But that region with the oaks, lot of rocky ground, wood. So yeah, that's a cool place, Kix, that you get to hunt. I like that area.
Thank you. Yeah, we love it down here, man. Tom, what was you going to say?
I was just talking about antler staining. There's some kind of cool theories to how the coloration, some of the responsibility of that coloration is due to the trees that they work when they're rubbing off their velvet. And I don't know, Kip, you might add to that, but I know that there was some theories too about some of the blood staining from when the velvet's peeling that could contribute to the antler staining and the coloration there.
Yeah, so some of that is genetic related, a little bit with coloration. You're right, Tom. Some of that is the blood when they shed that velvet. How long that stays on before how long they clean them. The longer that the blood is on there before they really polish them, they tend to be a little darker that year. This wouldn't apply to you guys as much or me, but when you get particularly into the deep south or the southwest, longer in the season, those antlers tend to become a little bit lighter just from bleaching of the sun. And that's particularly true in South Texas. But so yeah, the trees that they can rub on, certainly, sap from those trees, can help stain some of the antlers. So I think that's one of the things that's cool about deers. Every set of antlers is a little bit different. Some are chocolate the whole way. Some are really light colored the whole way. Some are a little darker at the bottom and lighter as they go. So just one of the things that I think makes whitetail so cool is that they're individuals in a lot of different ways with personalities and other things. But that's especially true with bucks and antlers.
So it doesn't have anything to do with what they eat? You don't?
It's not supposed to have anything to do with what they eat, because many times a deer will have similarly colored antlers across years. So, and that would be independent of a good acorn year one year and a bad acorn year the next year. So that's not supposed to be changed, just like, your hair color is different than mine. We could eat exactly the same thing, and some of those secondary characteristics like that, would be different. So it's more related to genetics and environment as opposed to exactly what their diet is.
Well, I guess it has nothing to do with the acorns then, but I thought it did.
Well, it certainly could have something to do with where those acorns are, and maybe some of the trees they're rubbing around there, or amount of sunlight versus shade they're getting in those. So I won't say that the acorns don't have some impact on that, but eating the acorns, the fact of consuming those as a diet, Kix that shouldn't have any impact on what coloration those antlers are.
Gotcha. Well, let's talk a little bit about the QDMA and the NDA here. Tell us how that whole thing got started and when it changed from the QDMA to the NDA. And I want to talk a little bit about the history of that.
Okay. So it was started in 1988 by Mr. Joe Hamilton. Joe was a deer biologist for the South Carolina DNR, and he worked with about 1,500 hunt clubs in the low country of South Carolina. So he got to work very closely with hunters, and he gave them doe harvest prescriptions. And at that point, hunters across the whitetails range were really good at shooting bucks, and very poor at shooting does, in large part because so many deer herds had been relocated and transplanted and protected during the early 1900s, that we learned that, hey, shoot the bucks that you want, save the does, because that's what's providing, the ability for these populations to grow. And that worked really well when we were recovering deer herds. But once deer herds became recovered, in the later part of the 1900s, now we needed to start shooting does to keep them from becoming overabundant. But that was a difficult thing for agents, state wildlife agencies, to convince hunters. And most states were dramatically under harvesting does. They couldn't convince hunters. So Joe saw a need. Hey, you know what? We need to provide some educational opportunities for hunters to, one, understand the need to shoot more does, but two, understand the value if, man, we just protected the majority of those 1.5-year-old bucks. We're not protecting all the yearling bucks. We're not protecting them all until they're 5 years old. Just protect them, half of them or over half of them that first year, so that they can get to 2, so that we can have good age structure on the buck side of the population, just like we do on the does. And deer evolved with a very complex social order, the way that they share information, all of this. And that happens best when you have full age structures on both the buck and the doe side. And in general, across the whitetails range, we had very natural or very good age structures for does, but very poor age structures for bucks, because we killed almost all of them at 1.5 years old. So very, very few reach maturity. And we used to say, it would be akin to in the human population, if we had ladies that were, from 1 to 100 years old, but you killed every man when he turned 17. And we laugh about it, but that's kind of what we would do with our deer herds by shooting, the vast majority of bucks at 1.5. So Joe met Al Brothers. Al was a wildlife biologist from South Texas. Al is the father of quality deer management. That whole philosophy of protect yearling bucks and focus some more of that harvest effort on the antlerless side so that you balance deer herds with the habitat and so that you have balanced age structures. So Joe took that philosophy that was alive and well in South Texas and nowhere else, brought it back to South Carolina, created the Quality Deer Management Association. And then that's what was the spark that literally took this to, an organization with members around the world. So that's where the whole thing started. And in the early years, it was about providing information and education to hunters. And because at that point, think of the late 80s, the early 90s, there was very little engagement between hunters and our state wildlife agencies. Essentially, our state said, these are the rules. This is what you're going to do. Boom. And what Joe tried to instill is to get the state wildlife agencies, hey, let's start working with your hunters. You create the best plan that you think you can to have a healthy deer herd, but you need hunters to implement that plan. If you can tell them to kill all the does that you want, but if they don't believe you or they don't support that plan, they're not going to do it. So let's start working together. We're going to provide information and teach hunters the value of shooting does, teach hunters the value of protecting yearling bucks, and teach hunters the value of being partners with your state wildlife agency. And at the same time, they told the state wildlife agency, hey, you need the hunters to be on your side. There's a lot of value on your side to work with the hunters. So that's where that whole thing began. And hunters and state agencies have a better and a closer working relationship today than ever before. That's not to say that there's not problems, and you can find hunters anywhere, that don't believe their state agency or dislike them. But in large part, it's a much better working relationship, which benefits deer and certainly benefits us as hunters. So that's where it all began, Kix, back in 1988 with Mr. Joe Hamilton.
Okay. And then when did it change from QDMA to the NDA?
So it was a QDMA for a long time. In about 2014, QDMA hosted the first ever National Whitetail Summit. There are national summits for waterfowl. There's a national summit for turkeys. There had never been one for deer. So we hosted one. We had stakeholders from all over the whitetails range come in. We had state agency folks and deer managers and private deer managers and hunters and outfitters. We had the hunting industry there. We had anybody who was a stakeholder in deer came. And we talked about the biggest issues impacting deer and what we needed to do. Well, one of the things that came out of that meeting was they said, we need a really strong advocacy arm for deer hunters. Somebody, that can work on the legislative end and do that. QDMA was a very small organization. We said, you know what? We can have a stronger policy arm. And the stakeholders at the summit said, perfect, do this. So that was what we left that summit with. Well, through, a pissing match basically with some of the board members, that advocacy arm that was always supposed to be part of QDMA got separated into a separate organization called the National Deer Alliance. And the National Deer Alliance started and was solely a policy arm for deer hunters. So it's separate from QDMA, was not supposed to be, and that went along several years. QDMA still worked very closely with the Deer Alliance. Fast forward to the pandemic. Now, suddenly, everything in our lives changed. The CEO of the QDMA was retiring. Nick Pinizzotto, who was a lifetime QDMA member, he was the CEO of the Deer Alliance, the policy arm. So our board member said, hey, you know what? Right now is a really good time to have a second chance to do the right thing. So he said, we work so closely with the Deer Alliance anyway. It doesn't make sense to have two organizations working, so we took the opportunity, said, hey, we were never supposed to be separate. Let's merge. So now we have the policy arm back to complement QDMA's, educational arm and all the stuff that we do. Our CEO position was open. Nick was the CEO there. So a lot of things just aligned. So we said, let's get together the way it was always supposed to be. So that's what we did. We took the opportunity to change the name because we had surveys for a number of years showing there was some negative connotations with the QDMA name. The word quality turned a lot of deer hunters off, and they thought, yeah, I don't belong there. The word management turned a lot of hunters off because they felt, well, I don't own any land. I hunt public land. That must not be for me. So we merged in 2020. We kept the QDMA's logo, which Joe Hamilton created, which we're so proud of because it has not a monster buck. It has a, representative, maybe a 3.5-year-old buck. So, a middle-aged deer, but it has the doe in the logo to show the importance of balancing, both the bucks and the doe side. So we kept the logo. We put everything back together the way that it was supposed to be in the first time. And we took the opportunity to change the name to come up with a name that's far more appropriate for really what we stood for. And it's a name that people at deer camp can recognize and relate to. Yeah, the National Deer Association. But it's also a name that works very well in the halls of Congress in Washington, D.C., where we advocate on behalf of deer hunters. So that's how it got together, when it really should have always been together, but also, where the new name came from. And I'm the longest tenured employee there. And when we were going through that, some of our staff and many of our board members asked me, like, hey, what do you think of the name change? And I said, we have talked for years internally about the negative issues we have, with the QDMA name. I get it. I said, what's most important to me is that we keep that logo. We keep the logo that Joe Hamilton created because that's so reflective of what the organization is with regard to just proper management of the resource. So, and they said, that was never in question. We were never going to change the logo. So kept the logo. I think we got a better name. We're a stronger organization. And, in the 22 years I've been here, we are by far the strongest from a staff perspective that we've ever been, and we're doing more good for deer herds and hunters in the natural resources than ever before, Kix. So I'm very blessed to be here, and big smile on my face for what the organization is doing today, and where we're poised to head in the future.
And as we talk to our grassroots members here in the state of Indiana, for example, we had our banquet this past summer. And when we send out banquet advertising and put the flyers out and send emails out to everybody, it's the, hey, we're the National Deer Association, formerly known as the QDMA, so that those folks out there still recognize this. And I'm sure there's just that period of transition still, we're in that, where people, it's going to be a household name again. It just takes that assimilation with, oh yeah, those are the same guys. That's the same organization, we had 120 folks show up at our little East Central Indiana banquet, had a great time, good turnout, raised money for the state and for the chapter and for the national organization. Proud to do that. And we will have a field day event this coming summer and do more of the same on a private farm and invite folks around to show them management tactics and techniques and have a good time and celebrate and learn something and enjoy each other's company in the process. So I firmly believe that there might have been a little bit of a confusion at the same time, but when folks understand it's the same place that we always have been, the same great information source and fighting for the right cause that people still support at 100%.
I agree. I think one of the things that I've always appreciated about what our chapters or our branches do is, Kix, we require all of them, to do an annual fundraising event like all the other organizations, because that's where they get, funds to do good stuff locally and to help the organization grow. But we've also always required them all to host an annual educational event, a field day, a workshop, a youth hunt or an adult, whatever it is, it has to be something and man, I think that's so great that we do that. And, Tom said he hasn't been involved, for 20 some years. And Tom, I vividly remember it had to be close to 20 years ago now, being in Indiana, with the branch with one of the field events that you guys did. Right. And I was there and able to speak at it and be part of that. So, I love that aspect of ours, that it's a giving organization and that all of our local volunteers, are teaching others and, and helping others within their communities. that's an awesome thing. And I think one of the things that's allowed us to prosper over the years, is that educational focus and component.
Absolutely.
I need to figure out if we've got a chapter down here in my area, because I don't even know if we do, to be honest. I'd like to join.
And if you don't, you would make the perfect candidate to start one up, Kix.
Well, we might have to talk about that.
I know we've had some extremely active ranches in Missouri over the years, including some down in your part of the state. I don't know where those active ones are right now, but Missouri has been a stronghold for some really good ranches in events like that over the years, Kix.
I'm sure we probably have somebody doing something. I'm not aware of it, so I need to look into it a little bit.
I'll tell you a quick story about that. Years ago, I was in Missouri. I was on a little Midwest tour speaking at a bunch of our branches events, and our regional director at the time lived in Kansas, but he oversaw Missouri, and he had it lined up that I was going to be there and speak. Well, I was going to talk in, I think it was the spring. Anyway, one of the Bass Pro stores, I was doing a seminar on a Saturday. So our RD said, "Hey, since you're going to be in town, how about doing a seminar for one of my branches Friday night?" I said, "Absolutely. I love to do those." So we had a branch event, and at it, man, it was just so electric. You could just feel everybody was so excited.
Yeah.
And I said to one of the branch guys there, I said, "Man, this is so much fun tonight. You can just feel the electricity in the air." What? And he said, "Oh yeah, because tomorrow's the opening day of deer season." And when he said that, the first thing that went through my mind was, good for you guys. I'm excited for you. The second thing that went through my mind was, there isn't going to be anybody at this seminar tomorrow at Bass Pro. So we go to Bass Pro. I'm there. There were 2 people for the seminar in the whole store.
Yeah.
And they're sitting there together. And I walked up and said hello. And they're looking around like, is it the right time? And I said, "How are you guys doing?" "Good." I said, "You aren't from Missouri, are you?" And they both said, "No, we're from out of state." "How did you know?" I said, "Because everybody from Missouri is in the woods this morning hunting. That's why there is nobody else here for this seminar." And that's how I knew you're not from Missouri, because if you're interested in deer and you were from Missouri, you would be hunting this morning too. So, I've had some talks over the years, Kix, where there weren't that many attendees. That is the record for the least, though. There was me, our regional director, and those 2 young guys from Kansas that were just happened to be in Missouri and stopped in the store that morning. So
that's hilarious.
We've laughed about that a lot over the years.
That is so funny, man. Yeah, Springfield is home. It's actually where Bass Pro was founded. National headquarters right here in Springfield, Missouri. Never been to that store. You got to go check it out. It's absolutely amazing.
Oh my gosh, it is. It is beyond amazing. I definitely will tip my hat to that and encourage anybody in that part of the state. They should stop, whether they're a hunter, an angler, an outdoor enthusiast or not. That store has something for everybody.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Johnny Morris does an amazing job with the conservation stuff around here, and he puts a lot of money into that kind of deal, and he's an amazing guy, man. Super nice guy. Tom, you got anything else here? I got one last little segment to do. I just don't want to cut us short on here or anything, but
no, we could start talking about personal stories and how our properties are, how much fun we're having and managing our land, and coming off of a season right behind of a pretty aggressive timber harvest. And I called my timber guy. I texted him, probably around August or September, after they had just finished in early April. And I was just taking a little walk through my place, and I said, "Hey, buddy, I just want you to know I've fallen in love with my farm all over again because of the way that the perspective of everything. There was a beautiful reset and all the new everything coming back in and regrowing, and I could see the value and what I just did as an owner for the wildlife on the property. Sure, it put a few dollars in our pocket, but it was the whole emphasis behind that was to regenerate that, get some sun in there, and start it over again." I could talk all day on stuff like that, but it's so rewarding for me. I'm super blessed to have 2 daughters that believe in it wholeheartedly. I've got now Zach Veter, my second son-in-law. He's bought in. Zach York, who's been with the family now for quite a few years. He's like my right-hand man. And every time I go, I can count on him being there, whether it's a chainsaw or a sprayer or a bow or a camera or whatever. We're out there just enjoying the heck out of it together. When you get your family bought in on the vision and they stay at it for a couple years, even just a minimum of 2 or 3 years, and they see something that they had their hand to change so dramatically as an improvement standpoint, then they fall in love with it. That's, man, I can't ask for a more rewarding, self-gratifying experience. And now I've got he's going to be 2 years old, Bo James York, my little guy, our first grandchild. And he's learning the word deer already and grabbing antlers on dad's second nice bow kill. The family aspect of it is where I'm at now. It's so rewarding to include the family. Yeah, I still enjoy going out to the farm and hunting and looking at the chance of a mature buck, but I feel like I'm missing something if somebody's not out there with me. It's just that it's come to that point in my life.
Dr. Grant Woods was on our podcast last week, and like he said, you can do an awfully lot with a chainsaw and some hand tools out there.
That's right.
Well, Kip, we got one last little section here. I won't keep you too long, but we like to call this our quick draw questions. And basically, I'm going to have you pick a number between 1 and 3. I've got 3 sets of 20 questions, and I'm going to ask you those 20 questions, and I want you just to answer them as quick and fast as you possibly can. So, are you ready for that?
All right. Let's go with number 1.
Number 1. All right. Here we go. Favorite outdoor meal after a successful hunt?
Backstraps. Venison backstraps.
Nice. How old were you when you first started hunting?
11. You're supposed to be 12 in Pennsylvania, but Dad let me get a little jump on that.
Morning hunts or evening hunts?
I have better evening stands, so I certainly enjoy being out there when the sun comes up, but I seem to have more success in the evening. So I'm going to go evening hunts.
Most memorable wildlife encounter?
Oh, I have had a bunch. Maybe I'm going to go probably the very first mature buck that I ever saw. Growing up in Pennsylvania, it was all young bucks and all that. I had never seen a mature buck in the woods in my life until I got to grad school in New Hampshire. And I'd shot a bunch of deer by then, but seeing that first mature buck entirely changed my world. So I'm going to go the very first time I ever saw a mature buck in the woods.
Nice. A favorite animal to hunt other than deer?
Oh, man. At one point, I grew up with a turkey call in my mouth, but you know what? I'm going to say elk. I've been blessed to go on a couple of Rocky Mountain elks, and I've got the bug.
I want to go on an elk hunt very badly. Best hunting tip for beginner hunters?
Say, have fun. I think too many people who start out think that you have to know everything to go. Nope. I think just taking the tact of, I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to be aware of what's going on around me, and I'm just going to have a good time. I think they will be more observant then, and I think they have a better chance to pick up things that can help them to be more successful. So, I think there's a lot of value in working hard and learning what you can, but man, just have a good time being in nature. And that's going to be a great teaching tool to helping you be a more successful hunter.
Awesome. Ideal acreage size for a hunting property?
Ooh, but this can vary so widely depending on what part of the country you're in. And I don't necessarily believe that bigger is always better, because I think there's a fine line somewhere between a property that you can adequately manage, where if it's bigger than that, you just simply don't take care of it the way that you could. I have been on places that were 20 acres, that were an awesome 20 acres, that were really good deer hunting. I've been on others that were 1,000 acres that necessarily weren't that good. So my advice here is, if you have a couple hundred acres, you can change your hunting world with regard to what opportunities you have from a deer end. So, man, that's a tough one, Kix. I don't know. There is an ideal, but I will say this. Some people that I've worked with, it was very small acreage that they felt was too little to impact. I disagree. They had great impacts by managing habitat. So, but man, a 200-acre piece would allow you to do a lot and allow you to involve a bunch of friends and family and other new hunters to share with.
Well, that's why I like this quick draw questions, because they are tough questions, but I just love the answers. Best way to attract whitetail to your land?
Having good cover. Good cover. If you have food, they can come, they're going to eat it. They might eat it at night, but with good cover, you have a better chance of having them there and then being able to see them during shooting hours.
Okay. Best way to keep your scent under control?
Pay more attention to the wind than anything else. I wash my clothes, in scent-free detergent, and I'm very careful with how I store them. But by far, the single biggest factor is, using the wind to your favor from when you're hunting, and that will do more than anything else to keep your scent at a minimum.
Most underrated piece of hunting gear?
Binoculars. I can't tell you how many people have been, even experienced hunters that, they'll have binoculars with them and they'll sit and watch and almost never pick them up. It's crazy how much farther you can see either into cover, into timber, into sloughs, into old fields when you're using binoculars. So, binoculars aren't there just once you see deer moving. They're there to help you find deer. So people can see a lot more animals if they spend a lot more time glassing as opposed to just having those binoculars around their neck or in their pack.
Crossbow or compound bow? Which do you prefer?
I prefer compound. I'm a diehard bow hunter, but I'm a crossbow fan. I am more than happy to share the woods with people using crossbows. I'm glad Pennsylvania allows them, even though I still carry my compound. Someday I probably will carry a crossbow. So, but I prefer using a compound.
Biggest challenge in managing your land?
Oh, man, just having enough time to do everything that I want. I'm not one of those people that complains about everything and, and there's never this. I'm one of those people that, man, there are so many more opportunities than I will ever get to. So sometime for me, the biggest challenge, I guess, is just partitioning what needs to be done and cutting it up into smaller blocks so that we can tackle that.
Bucket list hunting destination?
Ooh, I have been to Saskatchewan several times on work trips, and I used to go up there every fall and film with a Canadian whitetail TV show, doing bio tips for his show. And I used to joke and say, I am the only deer guy going to Saskatchewan in the fall, that's not hunting. So I have some friends up there. At some point, I'm going to hunt in Saskatchewan. But so that would probably be top of the bucket list for me.
Nice. Got two more here for you real quick. What is your favorite way to scout a property?
I always start aerially. I'm a huge Onyx fan. There are so much that you can learn starting from the 30,000 foot view, largely not just what's on the property looking, but what's around that property. I want to know what's in the neighborhood as I start to scout and start to figure things out. So I'm a huge fan of that. And even properties that I am very, very familiar with, I'm often amazed that once I start looking at them aerial, there are a lot of things that I pick up or didn't recognize that you can't necessarily see from being on the ground. So I like to start at the 30,000 foot view.
And last and final question, what is the most surprising thing that you have learned about deer behavior?
Oh, I think this may go back to, I certainly think that whitetails are cool, and I'm gonna pick a behavioral trait or a physiological trait as well from the doe side, not necessarily the bucks. When fawns are born, they can't urinate or defecate for about the first few weeks of life. Yeah, now this is partly an anti-predator strategy where, they're not urinating or defecating right where they're hiding so that they're not having extra scent there. But a bigger part of that is when they go to nurse from the doe, if you pay attention, what's happening there is that doe will lick their genital region to allow them to urinate and defecate. She will then consume those feces in the urine. And so people say, whoa, holy cow. There's some research that suggests that any bacteria in that fawn's body, when that mother consumes those, her body is then able to develop antibodies to battle that bacteria. And then she feeds them back to the fawn in subsequent nursings. So, man, it doesn't get much cooler than that. So, from a behavioral thing, watching that whole thing happen and understanding what's really going on there, man, that if that's not at the top, that's got to be pretty close to the top of the list.
That's awesome. I did not know that. That's all the quick draw questions I have for you, Kip. Good job.
All right. Well, man, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, guys. This has been a good time. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I know the deer season is in now, but I wish you the best of luck the rest of the season.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. And you as well, sir. Hopefully I'll be able to post pictures online like you did with Katie as far as my daughter or some of the grandsons, the sons, the boys here, or myself, if we're lucky enough.
Heck yeah.
Everything comes together. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that deer your daughter killed, man. That was a heck of a deer.
Big deer.
Thank you. That was a great hunt, and obviously just the best time for the two of us to be together, and the deer was icing on the cake for sure.
Absolutely.
All right.
Good deal. Kip, it's always good to see you, buddy.
Great to see you, Tom. Good luck. Thank you, Kix. Good luck to you, and you guys have a great day.
Kip, I appreciate
you as well.
Very much. Thank you for just taking your time out of your day to do
All right.
this.
Yes, sir. We'll see you.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
All right, guys. That has been episode number 9, I believe, of the Basecamp Country podcast. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook. Follow Kip Adams on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. He's everywhere. Follow Basecamp Country Real Estate everywhere. give us a shout out. Listen to us on Spotify and Apple. Go to our website, basecampcountry.com. If you guys have any questions or thoughts or concerns, or leave them in the comments below. We're happy to talk to you as best we can. Tom, any final thoughts there?
No, good conversation. Kip's a wealth of knowledge and a great guy, very humble, just a very approachable person. So he's always taking the time to help people out and understand, and happy to share what he knows. Very cool.
Very nice guy. Very nice guy. Appreciated him taking the time to do that. So, all right, guys. Well, as always, don't forget, here at Base Camp Country, it's more than just dirt. It's a lifestyle. We will see you guys again next week right here on the Base Camp Country podcast.